Hey guys, my name is Z and you're watching the Makes It Easy. And welcome to IGCSE Biology series, where today we have topic 3, which is circulation. And here are the lessons for circulation. We have the topics that I'll cover are surface area to volume ratio, xylem, phloem, roots, transpiration, red blood cells, blood and plasma, white blood cell, heart structure, circulatory system, blood transfusion, circulation, blood vessels, and heart rate and heart diseases. So check out the pinned comment down in the comment section to see all the timestamps. But just sit back and enjoy the video. So for the first lesson, we have surface area to volume ratio. So one thing to note is that small object has a high surface area to volume ratio, and big object has a lower surface area to volume ratio. So let's say here we have different cubes. Cube A has 1 cm side length, Cube B has 2 cm side length, and Cube 3 has 3 cm side length. So a hypothesis would be Cube C would take the longest to diffuse if something is placed on it, because it has a smaller surface area to volume ratio and it's bigger in size. So diffusion distance has increased and the diffusion rate decreases. So just relate the diffusion distance to the diffusion rate. Therefore, the hydrochloric acid will take the longest to cover the whole cube. So here's the relationship between surface area and volume and the ratio for cube A, B, and C. So moving on, we have this flatworm versus bird. So flatworm is a type of worm that's very small, and bird is obviously quite big. So we know that flatworm has a higher surface area to volume ratio and bird has a lower. Therefore, shorter diffusion distance for flatworm, and the diffusion rate of oxygen is quick enough to meet the demand of the body and the cells. Therefore, all cells can respire aerobically without having let's say lungs or anything to pump oxygen into the cells. And for the bird, it has a lower surface area to volume ratio, therefore diffusion would take long, and cells in the center of the bird would not receive enough oxygen to meet the demand. So the bird relies on the circulatory system to transport oxygen rapidly by mass flow in the blood. Therefore, diffusion occurs over a short distance only at the exchange surfaces like the lungs and the tissues. So we'll move on to xylem, phloem, and roots. So plants need minerals, water, sunlight, oxygen, and carbon dioxide for healthy growth. So here's how plants are adapted for transport. They have leaves, which are for entry and exit for gases needed by plants in the stomata, as discussed last lesson. Stems to connect the roots to the leaves, flowers, and the fruits. And it contains cells specifically adapted for transportation, and roots absorb water and minerals from the soil. So a vascular bundle is a strand of conducting vessels in the stem or the leaves of a plant, with phloem on the outside and xylem on the inside over here. It's a small diagram over here. So we'll look into the xylem, phloem, and roots for the vascular bundle. We have the xylem. It's located in the vascular bundle, and here's its structure. And the function of xylem is to transport water and minerals up the stem of the roots to the shoots and to the leaves. And this transport only occurs in one direction. And it contains lignin, an organic polymer that makes plant rigid and woody. And xylem is arranged in plants as vascular bundles, and it forms a continuous system connecting from roots, stems, and leaves. So for phloem, it's located in the vascular bundle. And here's the structure. The phloem carries cell sac including sucrose and amino acids, and it transports sugar produced in the leaves up and down the stem to growing and storage tissues. And this transport occurs in two directions. And similarly to xylem, it's arranged in plants as vascular bundles, and it forms a continuous system connecting roots, stems, and leaves. So then we have xylem and phloem again. The xylem vessels have thick cellulose walls strengthened by lignin, and inside of the cell is hollow, and xylem vessels are dead cells which allow more capacity for transporting water. And phloem is made out of columns of living cells. Sugar is carried to the leaves, from leaves to the growing and storage parts of the plant, and this movement happens in two directions. And phloem cells are also called the sieve tubes, as the cells are joined together by small holes at the end of each cell, and the ends walls are called the sieve plates. And then we have the root hair cell in the roots. Plants are 60 to 85% water, and root hair cells transport water away from the cells and stores it in the vacuole so that osmosis can happen. So osmosis is basically the net movement of water molecules from an area of high water potential to an area of low water potential through a semi-permeable membrane. And root hair cell also absorbs nitrate so that the solute concentration in the cell is higher, therefore osmosis will happen. And root hair cells have maximum contact with the soil and have firm anchorage. And the cells usually have more warm water than the soil, but the root hair cell either store the water in the vacuole or transport it away from the root so that the water potential in the soil is higher than the root hair cell so that water can flow in through osmosis. So for the process, root hair cells have a higher surface, therefore it has a small surface area to volume ratio, so it decreases the distance for osmosis and increases the rate of osmosis. And water goes into the root hair cell via osmosis from a high water potential area to a low water potential area. And the metabolic reactions also happen in the cytoplasm. So you can have a read for yourself for the root hair cell and the root. So we'll move on now. Then we have transpiration. Transpiration is the loss of water by evaporation of plants, and it generates the pressure needed to move water up the xylem against gravity. And plants lose water when they open the stomata and in the leaves to let in the CO2, or the carbon dioxide. So what is osmosis, as I discussed about just now? It's the net movement of water molecules from an area of high water potential to a low water potential area along the concentration gradient without the use of ATP energy. And the concentration gradient is affected by these factors, which includes volume of water, mass of solute, the temperature of the environment, the solvent density, and the distance traveled. And then we have Potometer for transpiration. Here are the stages for transpiration. We have water moves from soil to the root from osmosis. Roots are covered by tiny projections called root hair cells. And water travels up the leaves via xylem, and water travels through the veins of the leaves. And the loss of water through transpiration in the leaves set up a concentration gradient, continuously pulling water from the soil into all parts of the plant. So here's a practical to investigate the transpiration with this equipment. And transpiration can be measured by potometer, and a cut plant stem is sealed into the potometer using a rubber band or Vaseline, and an air bubble is introduced to the capillary tube over here. And the distance of the bubble that travels shows how much water the stem has taken up, and this gives an indirect measure of the rate of transpiration using some calculations. And then we have factors that affect the rate of transpiration. And the rate of transpiration is the speed at which a plant loses the water, and this varies depending on the plant's environment. And the first factor we have is light intensity. As light intensity increases, the rate of transpiration also increases. It increases in a curved way and it reaches its peak when the light is at 100,000 lux. And you can have a read for the rest. And then we have wind velocity. When wind velocity is at 0 km per hour, the rate of transpiration is a bit high. And as wind velocity increases, the rate of transpiration also increases. And you can have read for the how it affects the rate of transpiration. So we'll move on now. We have more factors that affect the rate of transpiration, like humidity. When it is at 0% humidity, the rate of transpiration is at its highest. And as humidity level increases, the rate of transpiration decreases. Because the atmosphere has a more higher water potential than the leaf, so when it's high humidity, the plants can't evaporate because the leaf have a smaller water potential, so it can't diffuse via osmosis. And for the temperature, as the temperature is 0, there's no rate of transpiration as the plant can't survive and water particles have little to no kinetic energy to evaporate. And as temperature increases, the particles of the plant gain more kinetic energy, so the rate of transpiration also increases. So I'm going to move on now to absorption by roots and up the stem. So for absorption by roots, we have what process causes water to enter the root hair from the soil water. We have osmosis. And what process causes water to travel up the xylem to the leaves, and we have transpiration. And up the stem, we have which part transport water up the stem. We have the xylem. And which part transport dissolved food around the plant, like glucose, sucrose, and amino acids. And we have, of course, the phloem. Then we have the red blood cells. Here are the features of red blood cells. It contains hemoglobin, and this carries the oxygen picked in the lungs and released to the body cell. There's no nucleus so that there's more room for hemoglobin and so more oxygen can be carried. It's biconcave or it's flexible so that oxygen is kept close to the surface and can be released quickly. And it has a large surface area to volume ratio and large diameter than capillaries so that the cells is forced to slow down so gas exchange will happen. And here's you can see the diagram over here. And then we have more red blood cell, the process. Number 1, oxyhemoglobin breaks down to release oxygen, and oxyhemoglobin is basically hemoglobin that carries oxygen. And number 2, oxygen is inhaled into the lungs and oxygen diffuses into the red blood cells. And then oxygen and hemoglobin together form oxyhemoglobin, as we talked about in the first one. And red blood cells travel to the lungs and oxygen diffuses from the alveoli to the blood. And red blood cells travel to the body cells and oxygen diffuses into the body cells. So you can have a read for more information. So we'll move on now to blood and plasma. So blood flows around the body, transporting substances from one place to another. And plasma is a bodily fluid that surrounds the blood cells and carries them along as it flows through the blood vessels. And plasma is mostly water and contains other substances that are dissolved in it. And here's an example of the substance. We have useful and waste substance. Useful substance dissolved in plasma are digested food, and this must be transported to where it is needed in the body. And waste substances dissolved in the plasma are called carbon dioxide or urea, and this must be transported to where they can be removed from the body, which are in the nephron or the kidney, which we'll look into it in the next few topics, which is coordination and response. So here's plasma over here. You can see red blood cells, white blood cells, platelet, and this tinted yellow one are called plasma. So we'll move on now. We have the digestive system for the blood and plasma recap. So the digestive system breaks in long insoluble molecules of food into small soluble molecules that the body can use, which is a process called digestion. Insoluble digested food diffuses from the small intestine into the bloodstream and dissolves in the plasma. And the digested food is then carried to the body cells by red blood cells and used in various chemical reactions. And we have transporting. Plasma for transporting CO2 and urea, which are the waste substance. Carbon dioxide is produced by respiration in the body cell, and this waste product is poisonous to the body, so it must be removed quickly as possible. And carbon dioxide diffuses from the body cells into the blood where it dissolves in plasma. And CO2 is then carried from the cells to the lungs, which is then expelled from respiration. And urea is another waste substance that is transported by the blood, and it's made in the liver. And urea is toxic to the body and must be removed as quickly as possible because it contains ammonia. And urea enters the blood in the liver and dissolves in the plasma, and is then carried away from the liver into the kidneys. Then kidneys then filter the blood in the nephron and remove urea from plasma. And the waste product is then removed from the body in water during urination. So we move on to the waste product. So here are some key terms: carbon dioxide, urea, digested food, and blood cells. As you can have a read from the useful substance and the waste substance. And here's a diagram where you can have a look. So we'll move on now. We have the functions. We have plasma, red blood cells, white blood cells, and platelet. And you can have a read through the functions. Like plasma is a blood fluid that suspends blood cells. Red blood cell is the most common type of blood cell. The white blood cell defend the body against pathogens. We'll look into it later. And platelet forms clot in wounds to stop bleeding. And we'll move on now. And here's white blood cells, some definitions. One, pathogen, I'm sure we all know what it is. But pathogens is a bacteria, virus, or microorganisms that can cause disease. An antibody is a blood protein molecule produced in response to and counteracting a specific antigen. And an antigen is a foreign harmful substance that enters the body from, let's say, the virus, as we all know, the COVID-19 virus. And the vaccine is a weakened or dead pathogen which is injected into the body. This trains an immune system to recognize and combat the pathogens. And here's the weakened and have a read. And the immunity. So as we talked about just now, pathogens are harmful microbes. and when it enters the body, it begins to reproduce and may make toxins, and the pathogens or toxins may destroy the body cells and make you feel unwell. And painkillers can relieve the symptom of an infection but do not kill the pathogens. Your immune system must begin to mount an attack against the pathogen. And how do pathogens cause illness? The pathogens can cause illness in 3 main ways: toxins, reproduction, and the immune response. And we'll move on now. We have the line of defense from white blood cell. The body has many different lines of defense, like physical and chemical barriers, and non-specific defenses, and pathogen-specific defenses. And you can read, you can have a look at the diagram. White blood cells, there's generally 2 main types of white blood cells. There's phagocytes and lymphocytes. And lymphocytes divide into B cells and T cells, and they divide further. And we'll look into the first line of defense, which is skin, tears, mucus, saliva, cilia, stomach acid, urine flow, friendly or beneficial bacteria, and neutrophils, which are white blood cells. And you can have a read. And we'll move on now. And now we'll look into the second and third line of defense. We have phagocytes, which are macrophages, and they are cells, white blood cells, that protect the body by ingesting the harmful foreign particles or the pathogens. And phagocytes does phagocytosis, which is the process of engulfing a large particle with the cell's plasma membrane. And you can have a look at the diagram for the phagocytosis. Then here we have the lymphocytes, which generally is B cells and T cells, and they are type of white blood cells all found in the blood or lymph nodes, and it's made in the bone marrow. And there's several types of lymphocyte, B cell and T cell. You can have a read for their general function. And we'll move into more detail. Lymphocytes B cell, which are plasma cells and memory cells. Plasma cells are the antibody producers B cell, and each B cell is specific to a single antigen. And for the memory cell, when the pathogens enter the body, the macrophage recognizes the pathogen, and the antibodies start to combat a pathogen. And if it's already been encountered before, there will be memory cells made for a specific pathogen, and the memory cells are used to store information as to how to combat a specific pathogen and the type of antigen for the virus or the let's say the pathogen that enters the body. So we'll move on to the lymphocytes T cells, T killers, T helpers, and the T killer and T helper as well. So the T cells recognizes antigen and either attack them or coordinate this activity of other cells in the immune system. And T killers, they are cytotoxic and they can only bind to a specific shape of the antigen. And when they bind, they release cytotoxins to kill that cell. And for T helper, they help to activate the T killer cells, and they stimulate B cells to secrete antibodies, which is quite complicated. So we'll move on to immunity. So active immunity is when your body responds to an infection by making its own antibodies or antitoxins, and is stimulated by vaccines. And you can have a read for the vaccines. And passive immunity. Many snakes produce a powerful neurotoxins that can be lethal to humans, but people bitten by snakes can be treated by antivenom, and antivenom contains antibodies to give an instant immunity, and it's produced by injecting horse with small non-lethal doses of venom, and over time the horse produces antibodies which are extracted and processed. And as the person didn't make the antibodies themselves, this is called the passive immunity. So we move on to the heart structure. You can have a C for the structure and a more complicated structure over here. The aorta is connected to the left ventricle and carries oxygenated blood to all parts of the body except the lungs. The vena cava is connected to the right atrium and brings the oxygenated blood back from the tissues of the body. And you can read for the pulmonary artery, vein, semilunar valves, and the tricuspid or bicuspid. So here you can see the right atrium, the right ventricle, the left ventricle, and the left atrium. In the left atrium, you can see it's like inverse because you can imagine if this heart is directly on you, so the left is this side and the right is this side. And then we have more heart structure. The heart also needs its own blood vessels or coronary arteries and cardiac veins, and they supply the heart muscles with oxygen so that the muscle cells can respire, and also remove the waste of carbon dioxide. And the blockage of the coronary arteries leads to myocardial infarction, which is the medical term for heart attack, because the heart muscle is deprived of oxygen and it cannot respire, so it dies. Okay, you can have a read. And then we have the circulatory system. Pulmonary artery, as we talk about, is the only artery that carries deoxygenated blood, and normally artery carries oxygenated blood, and the pulmonary vein is the only vein that carries oxygenated blood. So here's single circulatory system versus double circulatory. You can have a read. And the open circulation versus closed circulation. So we'll move on in a few seconds. And we'll move on now. We have a few questions. The diagram shows a human circulatory system. The type of blood vessels for a W over here. What is it called? And it's called the artery, and X is the vein. And explain why this is called a double circulatory system. You can talk about the idea that blood passes through the heart twice to complete one circuit. Because it goes up and goes down, and then it goes around and goes back to the heart. And the right side pumps deoxygenated blood into the lungs, and left side pumps oxygenated blood to the body or the tissue cells. And here are more questions you can have a read. And here. And here. So now we have blood transfusion. And blood transfusion is taking blood from one person and giving it to another, and it is used to replace blood loss in accidents. So here's ABO blood groups, or blood grouping. Their cells contain markers on the surfaces called antigens. And red blood cells can contain antigen A and antigen B. So you can see the antigens and antibodies contained in those. And the donor and recipient. So we'll move on to circulation. And as we discussed about just now, the single circulation and single circulatory system and the double circulation. So it's basically what we talked about just now. But advantage for single is that the blood circulating around the body has already been oxygenated from the gills, which are example for fish. And disadvantage is that it has a rapid fall of velocity and pressure as the blood leaves the gills, and the pressure is too low for efficient kidney function as in mammals. So mammals, or like human, use double circulation system, which advantage is that oxygenated blood is kept separated from deoxygenated blood, and blood pressure in the systemic circulation is kept higher than that in the pulmonary circulation. Then we have circulation, as we talked about just now, the open circulation and closed circulation. You can have a read for insects and human. And the advantage, disadvantage, and the advantage for closed circulation. So we'll move on now. Now we have blood vessels. There are three main types of blood vessels. They are arteries, veins, and capillaries. An artery is blood that is pumped from the heart to the body cells along the arteries in oxygen-rich blood. Arteries carry blood at high pressure away from the heart, therefore thick walls. So here's a diagram for it. And arteries have a narrow lumen and thick muscular walls, meaning blood from the heart is kept at a higher pressure and flows. And it flows quickly to reach every part of the body, even the little toes. You can have a read for the description. So now we can see the vein. Vein carries blood that travels from the body cells to the heart. Along the veins is oxygen poor blood, and veins carry blood at low pressure back into the heart. Therefore, it requires only a thin layer of muscle and elastic fibers and large lumen. So you can read the description. So one thing to note is that because it's carried in low pressure, there's like valves over here to prevent it from backflowing. So there's capillaries. Capillaries link arteries to vein, and they are the only blood vessels where substance can be exchanged between the blood and the body cells. So you can have a read for the description for capillaries while looking at the diagram. And it's wall made of a single layer of cells so that the diffusion distance is small and the diffusion rate is high. So we'll move on to heart rate and heart diseases. The activity of the heart can be checked by making an ECG or electrodiagram that shows a regular pattern of the flow of electrical current through the heart and muscle, and also can measure the pulse rate and the heart sound, and it's caused by the heart valves closing in sequence. And when we exercise, the muscles need to contract, thus they have to respire at a higher or faster rate to produce more energy. And the heart will also beat faster to increase blood flow to supply more glucose and oxygen for increased aerobic respiration to the muscles and remove CO2 and lactic acid. Then here's heart rate and heart diseases. We have CHD, which stands for coronary heart diseases. And coronary arteries provide O2 and glucose to the heart. And plate builds up and narrows the lumen, and therefore less blood to the heart and less oxygen to the heart in the case of CHD, meaning less aerobic respiration, thus producing less energy. And lactic acid also builds up, causing part of the heart to stop pumping, and eventually heart muscles die and it can't contract, leading to heart attack. Or let's say and the medical term for heart attack is myocardial infarction, as talked about just now. And this one over here, it's a meaning for hardening of arteries, and they are made up of cholesterol, fat, and fatty substance. And here are all the risk factors for CHD. You can have a read. And lastly, the ways to reduce the risk of CHD are as follows. Reducing fatty and cholesterol high food, regularly exercise can ensure better blood flow, and avoid smoking as nicotine in cigarettes can damage blood vessels and increase blood pressure. As we talked about last topic in respiration and gas exchange, as smoking contains nicotine and tar, which are very, very harmful for humans. And here are some definitions where you can have a look. So that's it for the circulation topic for IGCSE Biology. I hope you guys have enjoyed this video, and if you did, please leave a thumbs up and comment if you have any questions or any comments. And check out my Instagram in the description and give me a follow to support me for more daily content. And I hope you guys have enjoyed this video and hope you guys have found it helpful. I'll see you guys in the next video. Until then, stay safe and happy learning.